the libertarian response to a pandemic. And I'm going to let you lead on this because I'm in two minds, and this is important stuff. You know, libertarianism as a political philosophy, conservatism, progressivism, these political philosophies are all well and good, and they can sound nice when someone gives you a sound bite. Libertarianism is don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. Sounds great. How do we put that into practice in the real world, which is complicated and messy?
Yeah, thanks, mate. It was a question for you.
Oh, wasn't it? Oh, great. No, I'm throwing it to you, mate. Because this is important stuff for us to talk about. It may not be relevant in the context of what's happening in Australia today. We can't dictate Australia's policies or Victoria's policies or Queensland's policies, but I think it's an important thing for people who identify as libertarians to be thinking through.
Yeah. So I think the thing is, you've got to. With all philosophy, I think you've got to try and disassociate yourself from the current circumstance, right?
Okay.
Philosophy is about perhaps what ought to be, not what is.
Okay.
What could be, not what needs to be, kind of thing. So,
okay.
So if we imagine a world, a libertarian world, where there's very limited government, right? Where basically the rule of the land is at best a limited government enforcing common law. If we imagine that world, we imagine that world where there are very few policing powers because small government doesn't have the resources to put the jackboot on the neck of everyone who complains. So the resources, they shrink down to. If you've got corona, that's going to change the nature of this whole discussion right now. Right?
No, you know what? I had not sneezed for ages until I took another sip of my tea.
Right.
I'm actually going to experiment with this. I might actually be having a reaction under these hay fever type conditions in springtime in Melbourne. I might actually be having a reaction to the tea. That's interesting. I just took a sip and now I'm sneezing again.
I bet you didn't have hay fever when you had that cookie, did you?
No. I had other things. There was a lot going on when I had that cookie, but not hay fever, that's for sure. It'll settle down in a couple of minutes.
So I think to answer that question or to examine that question or discuss it, you've got to disassociate yourself from what is at the moment and imagine a world that is a kind of a libertarian world, if you like.
Goodness.
And in a libertarian world, I was going to make a joke about you dying on screen, but that's probably important.
I tell you what's not impossible is that I might get arrested on screen, so stand by for that.
Well, I mean, the beauty of the modern age is that most arrests now are on screen if you've got your wits about you, and it's fantastic. Honestly, it's fantastic. Yeah. But so if we start with the premise that government isn't very big, then it's that whole concept that government then doesn't have those enforcement powers, and it just shrinks down to basically enforcing common law. Now, some anarchist libertarians would say, well, even that shouldn't exist. But it's just in principle, we're just talking, basically some sort of libertarian kind of enclave somewhere.
Sure.
Maybe an Ayn Rand novel somewhere. And so then the thing is, well, what if a pandemic hits that society? What happens? Well, government has very little ability to do anything. Now, I argue that in that society, government, who may, government really, it really can't do much at all, right? So then you got to ask yourself, well, what do individuals do? So if a pandemic sweeps through, and it's a very legitimate question, I think, is so what do individuals do when a pandemic sweeps through a society? And we all know right from the beginning, and this is the key thing, right from the beginning, we know that government isn't there to help us, right? So it's the Ronald Reagan quote, right? It's kind of like government's not the solution to your problems. When the pandemic hits, it's every man for himself. And this is, I've mentioned Ayn Rand a few things. I mean, this is kind of like the virtue of selfishness stuff. It's the invisible hand kind of thing. If we focus on ourselves and the things that we love, if you and I focus on our family and the things that we love, what do we do when we're under the pump? Well, we hunker down. I mean, we essentially put ourselves in lockdown, right?
Yeah.
We hunker down and we wait and work out what the lay of the land is. And as we're hunkering down, as we're working out how to run our businesses, working out whether we should go to work or not, working out what the best thing to do, there's a cost to that, right? But this is what libertarian, and then the question becomes, well, what is my best interest? Is my best interest to honour the call to go to work by my employer, or was my best interest served by staying hunkered down and losing my job? And so
the critical thing is going to be, each person will make their own decision based on their own particular circumstances. If I cohabitate with my elderly parents, I'm going to make a different decision to if I'm single and living alone, because the risks in my life are different.
Correct. And that's spot on. So the libertarian understands that. You understand that. I'd say 98% of the population struggle with this concept. But that's exactly what would happen. And you know what? Topher, we would make mistakes. Some of us would make a mistake and we would go out and we might get COVID and we might pass it on to our parents and it would be deeply regretful. But we also know, we know that governments also make tragic mistakes.
And we've seen that. We've seen that in New York. We saw it in Sweden. We've seen it around the world.
Yeah. We perhaps saw it in Victoria as well.
We did. 800 odd people.
Yeah. So I think we can sort of imagine. I think you and I, in particular, I'm not sure that perhaps most of your viewers can imagine a world where there is no government, and when threats come, we make decisions. Well, it's in our best interests.
And we know that we have to make the decisions. That's the key point.
That's the key point. Yeah, no, you're quite right. And that is the key point. So, but if you stretch that out a little bit and you say, well, okay, what if there's a little bit of government? What if there's government that sort of runs nursing homes, for example, right? If we just stretch it out a little bit, like just So government runs nursing homes. Now, my auntie, who just died, was in a nursing home. She had, Alzheimer's. She was, putting aside all that, but she's clearly incapable of looking after herself. Mm-hmm. So, if government runs it, if my auntie is at home and I'm looking after her, then I know what to do, right? We're individuals. We just make our decisions. We may make mistakes, but we do the best we can for the people we love. But when government takes control of someone else's life and sticks them in a nursing home, well, then the question gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it? What's the libertarian? What's the stretch libertarian position on those sort of things? Yeah. And so maybe there's, an onus or responsibility on government to protect those that can't protect themselves, who don't have the benefit of others around them, or maybe have legislated that the others around them can't even go and visit them and protect them, can't even pull them out of the nursing home. And that's where it starts to get complicated, right? And if you start with that sort of complicated, very simple, complicated position, then you stretch out further and further. And you know what? Everything becomes complicated. Yeah. And I just keep thinking, you know what? I wish we lived in a libertarian world where I could look after my family, you could look after yours. And then I look around the world and I think, well, what is the most public, obvious example of this kind of philosophy? And I keep looking at Sweden. And you and I were looking at Sweden right from the get-go, because they said right off the bat, they said, look, this is a dangerous virus. For God's sake, look after yourself. Do the right thing. Don't mingle. Don't.
Okay. Can I prove your point? When I bring up Sweden, the most common retort that I get back is people saying, yes, but they voluntarily socially distanced. They voluntarily did a bunch of those things that our government has told us to do over here. And I'm like, yes, and what's your point? Like, that is my point.
Yeah. And this is why most of your viewers now, well, no, you've got a very good intellectual viewership, but this is why 98% of the population drops off this conversation, because they don't get this point. But it's a crucial point. It's a philosophical point. It's not a health crisis point. It's not a government mandate. It's not anything. It's a philosophical point, and everyone has a stake, and everyone has an opinion on philosophy. And Kerry Chant and Sutton and whatever her name is, they can't help us with this. They're not philosophers, right? They're bureaucrats. They're nothing. They are literally nothing when it comes to these important questions.
So if I can boil it down to what for libertarians like you and I is a cliche, but for a lot of people is a new at least expression of this particular thought.
Yeah.
Just because we say, or a libertarian says, the government should not do something, doesn't mean that we don't think it should be done. Right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So a libertarian like myself says the government should not be involved in building roads. All right. And in fact, actually, mostly the government is not involved in building roads. And my viewers know that I've been working for 5 years on a go-karting business. And the developer who owns the land that we're building the go-karting site on has had to build a couple of kilometers of road to get to the go-karting site that we can't even build yet because of the freaking paperwork involved. Right. He's had to build a paved road all the way there. When I live in a relatively new subdivision in the southeast of Melbourne, the developer built all the roads in this subdivision. Now, there's this idea that people have that, if the government didn't require them to build roads, they wouldn't build roads. There'd be no roads at all. No. If a developer wants to get top dollar for the blocks of land that they're selling in their development, they will provide paved roads to those blocks of land. That's what they will do in order to get their money, in order to make the most money. Just because we say the government should not be involved in, let's say, healthcare or pandemic management or whatever it may be, doesn't mean that we don't think it should be done. To further prove the point, I went along with the 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I wore a mask. I socially distanced. I did those things. Now, we were told in Victoria, I don't know how it was in Queensland, we were told 2 weeks to flatten the curve, we need to protect the healthcare system's capacity. We need to make sure that this pandemic does not overwhelm the healthcare system. And if you think back to January and February of 2020, the numbers we were getting were pretty scary about how infectious this was and how deadly this was. Now, I know, because I live my life in nerdy numbers, that the early numbers are always going to be the worst. It's only going to get better from there. And there's certain reasons for that. Maybe we'll get into that tonight. Maybe that's a discussion for another day. But the early numbers are always going to be the worst. But even knowing that, and knowing that it wasn't as bad as it looked at the time, I still went along with that voluntarily. I said, you know what? Okay, that makes sense. I don't want someone who needs intensive care to show up to an intensive care unit and they don't have space for that person. I don't want that to happen. So you know what? I'll wear a mask and I'll socially distance and I'll do the things that we've been asked to do. Just because we don't think the government should do it doesn't mean that we don't think it should be done. And this, I think, is something that a lot of people don't get.
Topher, you and I had a little, you probably don't remember, but you will remember when I mention it. But you and I had a little back and forth about how, you know what, maybe the best thing for our families and for society is to get COVID, right?
Yeah.
We're not in the go zone.
Yeah.
The chances of, certainly you dying with your very healthy lifestyle is very low.
That is on display right now, yes.
Yeah,
sorry. Let me improve that picture. Yes, my very healthy lifestyle. Sorry, you were saying.
And we thought, well, you know what, let's get ourselves out of the way before the health system clogs up. And I remember this, we had this interaction and I was very genuine about it. Like, people laughed at me and I thought, no, I was actually thinking, no, you know what, I'd like my kids to get it now.
Yes.
Because if they're going to get through this, well, get it out of the way, clear the bloody path.
The very first video that I released on the topic of COVID was in March 2020. And in that video, I volunteered to be infected with the coronavirus, actively infected, and I meant it. Yes, it was a funny video, blah, blah, blah. But if someone had said to me, hey, actually, the government is rolling out a strategy whereby we infect younger, healthier people who are at extremely low risk with the coronavirus in order to build herd immunity to protect older people, I would have taken my chances, knowing that by my numbers, which I did a few months later in another video, by my numbers, around 26 people would have died from the coronavirus, young people like me. All right. I would have taken that chance. I would have accepted my risk. And if I'd been one of the unlucky 26, I would have accepted that reality in order to be able to conquer this thing and move on. So I do remember that exchange, and I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment.
And so and it's interesting, right? You're laughed at when
I get
and
mocked
I
all
was
the time.
too,
I'm
right?
used to it.
It was like we're laughed at, right? But the thing is, like, no one talks about the death rate from taking the vax. Now, I'm not an anti-vax. I've got jabbed, right? I got jabbed.
Yep. Okay.
But I'm pro-choice, as you are, and
Yep.
but no one laughs at the death rate when it comes from getting AstraZeneca. 9 people have died from getting that jab.
Yep.
We're not sure
So
how
far.
many are going to die from. And there's a 30-day delay, so more people are going to die from AstraZeneca.
Yep.
But no one laughs at that. No one sort of, it's kind of it's just an interesting kind of dynamic. If you're being fair dinkum, you would say, well, these things are directly comparable. We said we'd get antibodies, get natural immunity from getting the virus. There's a certain statistical likelihood of dying from that, and we should compare that with statistical likelihood of dying from getting a vaccine. And if you're a 12-year-old and a parent of a 12-year-old, which is better? And the math is unclear. It's literally unclear.
I'm gonna disagree with one thing you said there. It's not all the same. The death of a young person as a result of an adverse reaction to the AstraZeneca vaccine is, and this is not me being heartless, this is actually, if you look at quality of life adjusted years, if you look at how insurance adjusted, what are they called? The guys that run the numbers in the background.
They got a term for it. Yeah.
If you look at how they calculate the value of life, a younger person is worth more than an older person.
Of course, Topher. I didn't mean that. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, I understand. But for the sake of everyone watching, when someone passes away from COVID-19 at 85 years of age, that is a tragedy for their family. But it's hard to justify spending multiple tens of millions of dollars just in government spending, let alone the cost to society in terms of lost economic activity, etc. Just in direct government spending, we're spending, I believe it's about $25 million per life lost, and the average age is 85. It's very hard to justify that.
Yeah, and ordinarily, the bureaucrats that run the health system have numbers around.
Thank you, Stuart. An insurance actuary.
Correct. Yeah. So the bureaucrats run numbers around what's the best, dollar spent, lives saved. Yep. And so a hospital costs, $1 billion to build. Hospitals save a lot of lives. We could have built, 100 hospitals in town, hospitals. Yep. So it's really difficult to, like history will judge, or history will bury. The winners, write history. I don't know.